I never thought a simple text message could make my hands tremble like that. But when the screen of my phone lit up that morning, my entire body froze as if I had been struck. The message wasn't long, it wasn't dramatic, but it was sharp enough to carve into my chest like a knife. You won't be joining us on the family cruise. My wife would prefer to keep it just family. Those words, sent from my son, my only child, glowed like fire on the small glass screen, searing themselves into my mind. For a few seconds I could not breathe. I stared at the words as my chest tightened, the blood roaring in my ears like ocean waves crashing. This wasn't from a stranger, not from an enemy, but from Matthew, the boy I raised, the boy I once held close every night when nightmares shook him from his sleep. And yet here he was, shutting me out with a text message. Just months before, I had given him the greatest gift I could ever imagine giving. An entire house fully paid, no mortgage, no burden of debt. A safe home for him and his wife Emily. A foundation for their future, built from the decades of work and savings that had drained every ounce of my strength. I had stayed up countless nights doing the paperwork, meeting with the bank, arranging every detail until the keys were in his hand. I told myself it was an act of love, a gift that said, "You will never struggle the way I struggled." And now, in return, I was being told I wasn't family enough to sit beside them on a ship bound for some tropical paradise. My hands were cold, stiff as I typed my response. One word. Okay. That was all. That tiny word contained everything: hurt, betrayal, and the realization that after all my sacrifices, I had become invisible to them. I hit send, but inside my mind screamed louder than my voice ever could. So I'm good enough to buy your house, Matthew, but not good enough to sit at your dinner table. Not good enough to ride your cruise ship. My heart pounded like war drums in my chest, my breathing shallow, but on the surface my face was calm, detached. Something inside me, something I didn't even realize had been holding on all these years, cracked in that instant. The part of me that had always swallowed pride, excused their little cruelties, told myself they didn't mean it, that part died with that message. Then came the follow-up, a second blow before I could even recover. Emily, I hope you understand. It's just simpler for everyone this way. Simpler. Of course. It was simpler now that they had the house. Simpler now that they thought their future was secure, their foundation built on my sweat and sacrifice. I set the phone down slowly, my fingers trembling slightly, but there were no tears. Not anymore. Because at that moment a new part of me woke up. The part that had been quiet too long. The part that refused to be humiliated. They thought I would accept this like all the other times I had excused their coldness, but they were wrong. I sat in my kitchen, the morning sunlight creeping across the floor, catching on the wooden chairs, the curtains I had sewn by hand, the countertops I had polished with pride. All of it for them. For Matthew and Emily, for the family I believed I was building. But now those walls felt foreign, the house no longer mine, but a museum of mistakes. Smiling photos lined the walls. Disney when Matthew was little, Cancun with Emily, the Christmas trip I had paid for entirely. Each image mocked me, a reminder of how many times I had given, funded, excused, and stayed silent. I thought back to the housewarming when I had placed the keys into their hands. Emily clasped mine, tears shining in her eyes as she whispered, "You'll always have a room here." I had believed her. Because mothers believe. But looking around me now, in the silence that followed their rejection, I saw the truth. I had never been family to them. I had been a resource, a convenience, a purse with no bottom. And once they believed that purse had been emptied, they no longer needed the woman attached to it. The silence in the house grew unbearable, so loud it seemed to press against my ears, each tick of the clock reminding me that I had become a stranger inside my own life. By the next morning I couldn't take it anymore. I picked up the phone and called Martha, the one person who had stood beside me through every storm. She arrived within the hour, no questions asked, just as she always had. That is the thing about old friends. You don't have to explain the tremor in your voice. They hear it in the spaces between your words. She stepped through my front door and her eyes scanned my face, seeing the truth before I could even open my mouth. "Tell me," she said softly, setting her purse down on the table. My throat tightened as I slid the phone across the counter. The cruel text from Matthew and Emily glowing on the screen. Martha read silently, her jaw clenching, her eyes narrowing with the quiet fury of someone who had expected this moment. When she finally spoke, her words landed like stones. "They've been planning this, Liv." My stomach nodded. "Planning? No, maybe Emily got into his head, maybe Matthew doesn't really." My voice trailed off, too small, too uncertain. Martha shook her head slowly. "Liv, you raised a good boy, yes. But you also raised a boy who never had to struggle. A boy who always had you smoothing the road in front of him, picking up the pieces before he even knew they were broken. And Emily saw that. She saw what she could mold him into. You made yourself small for them, always useful, always available. And now they think that's where you belong." Her words pierced deeper than the text message had, because I knew she was right. Memories rushed through me. Every time I had canceled vacations to watch their dog, drained my savings to wipe away their student loans, showed up with groceries when Emily said she was too busy. Always there, always giving, always invisible. I tried to protest, but my lips trembled around the words. "They've already taken everything, Martha. The house, my savings, my time. What else could they possibly take?" Martha leaned forward, her hand covering mine, firm and steady. "More than you realize. Have you checked your accounts recently? Do you know if your name is still on the house title? On your investments? You've let them handle too much. You trusted too much. And trust is the easiest thing to weaponize." My breath hitched. The thought hadn't even crossed my mind. Emily, she helps with the online payments sometimes. She said it was easier for taxes. My voice faltered, shame curling inside me. "I didn't think." Martha exhaled sharply, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Liv, you need to stop thinking like their mother and start thinking like their target. You need to log into everything today. Every account, every statement. And if something looks off, we go straight to a lawyer. No hesitation." Her words made my pulse quicken. Fear and realization tangled inside me, tightening around my ribs. For years I had convinced myself that Emily's syrupy kindness, her practiced smile, was genuine, that she was helping me out of love. But what if it wasn't kindness at all? What if it was calculation? Martha's eyes locked onto mine, unflinching. "You've always thought being quiet made you strong. But silence can make you vulnerable too. They are counting on you not to look, not to ask, not to fight. Don't give them that satisfaction." I felt something shift inside me then. Something cold and sharp beginning to harden. I wasn't just a sweet, helpless old woman. I was someone who had built an entire life out of resilience. And now I saw what they had done with my trust. I straightened my back, my voice steadier than it had been in days. "All right. We start today." Martha nodded, a small flicker of pride in her eyes. "Good. 'Cause Liv, you're not done yet. And they're not ready for what's coming." That night sleep didn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the glow of that text message and heard Martha's voice warning me to protect myself. So at 2:17 in the morning I gave up, pulled my laptop onto the kitchen table, and stared at the login screen with a tightness in my chest that felt like both fear and defiance. For years Emily had told me I didn't need to bother with all the confusing online accounts, that she would handle the utilities, the property taxes, even some of my retirement paperwork, always saying it was simpler that way, always smiling as though she was taking a burden off my shoulders, and I had wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe it was love. But tonight my fingers hovered over the keyboard with a different awareness, my breath shallow as I typed in my credentials. The dashboard loaded, familiar and foreign at the same time. Neat columns of numbers I had barely glanced at before. At first glance everything looked normal: utilities, groceries, small donations, routine expenses. But Martha's words echoed. "Trust can be weaponized." So I dug deeper, scrolling slowly, methodically through months of history. The further back I went, the more uneasy I became. Small transfers, too neat, too regular, hidden beneath categories like home repairs or emergency expenses. Amounts just low enough to avoid suspicion, but they weren't mine. I clicked deeper, my stomach dropping when I saw it. Linked cards not under my name but under a secondary user account. Emily's name. My breath caught, my hands frozen on the keyboard. She had been siphoning money for months, maybe longer, quietly bleeding me in amounts small enough to slip beneath my notice. It wasn't just about the cruise, it wasn't just about a family slight. This was theft, organized and deliberate, wrapped in the disguise of help. I kept scrolling, my pulse hammering in my ears as more transactions surfaced, each one like a tiny cut I had never felt until now. Furniture purchases I had never seen, payments to accounts I didn't recognize, transfers marked as property maintenance even though no repairs had ever been done. Each click was another betrayal, a confirmation that my trust had been their greatest weapon. I sat back, the dim light of the kitchen casting shadows across the photographs on the wall. Smiling faces from vacations I had funded, holidays I had paid for, the housewarming that had drained my savings. Those photos no longer looked like memories. They looked like evidence of an elaborate con I had walked into willingly. My throat burned but no tears came, only a strange cold clarity. Emily hadn't just been helpful, she had been strategic, positioning herself quietly, invisibly, until I no longer controlled my own life. And Matthew, did he know? Or had he chosen not to see as long as the money kept flowing? I whispered into the silence, my voice trembling but fierce. You gambled with my kindness, Emily. You gambled with my trust. My fingers clenched around the edge of the table. For so long I had told myself that staying quiet didn't make me weak. But now I understood that silence could be a prison, a cage built from my own willingness to excuse their behavior. They thought they had me cornered, but they were wrong. Something inside me shifted, hardening into resolve. They might have used my love as leverage, but they would not erase me. Not now. Not ever. By the time the first pale light of dawn crept across my curtains, I already knew what I had to do. The decision had settled into me like a stone, heavy but unshakable. I showered, dressed, and drove to Dalton's office before they even unlocked the doors, sitting in my car with my hands gripping the steering wheel as if letting go might undo the resolve that had carried me this far. Dalton had been my attorney for years, a steady presence during the purchase of Matthew and Emily's house, the paperwork for my estate, even the documents Emily had once pushed me to sign under the guise of making things simpler. He greeted me that morning with a warm smile that faded quickly when he saw my face. Olivia, I didn't expect you so early. Is everything all right? I sat down across from him, folded my hands in my lap to stop them from shaking, and said the words I never thought I would. I need to reverse the house gift. He blinked, taken aback, his pen pausing over the yellow pad. The property you transferred into Matthew and Emily's names? I nodded. Exactly that. I want it undone. I want my assets locked down, every financial power revoked, and I want every paper trail documented. For a moment he hesitated, not because he disagreed but because he understood the gravity. Olivia, this may create tension. I let out a bitter laugh, the sound sharp in the quiet office. They've already created tension. I've simply been too blind to see it. His eyes softened, but his tone was firm. Very well, we'll proceed. But you need to know this will not be quick or easy. Once a gift is recorded, then we make it legal. I cut in, my voice steadier now. Whatever it takes. He studied me for a long moment before nodding. All right. We'll start immediately. But I'll need to see any recent activity. Transfers, authorizations, anything Emily may have processed. I leaned forward, my voice dropping lower. I want every single transaction documented. Every withdrawal, every transfer, every piece of paper she slipped under my nose. I want proof of all of it. A flicker of approval crossed his face. We'll need that evidence if this ever escalates. It's going to escalate, I said quietly. Let's not pretend otherwise. Dalton scribbled notes quickly, his pen scratching against the pad. You may also want to consider hiring a private investigator. If Emily has been siphoning funds or using your name for unauthorized accounts, we'll need a third party to trace it. Courts take that very seriously. My stomach twisted, but not with fear. This was readiness, clarity. Do it, I said. Hire whoever you trust. He nodded once, decisive. We'll handle the legal side. The investigator can handle the rest. As I left his office later that morning, a strange lightness filled me, not because the problem was solved, but because for the first time I wasn't waiting for the next betrayal. I wasn't playing defense anymore. I was moving. And in that movement, in that quiet determination, I felt the first taste of freedom I hadn't known in years. The very next morning as I walked into the kitchen, the sunlight hit something pale on the floor just inside the doorway. A plain white envelope slid under my door during the night. My heart clenched before I even bent to pick it up, because I knew that familiar handwriting on the sticky note attached. Just sign whenever you're ready, Mom. It'll make everything easier while we're away. Emily. My fingers trembled slightly as I peeled the note away and opened the envelope, unfolding the neatly typed documents inside. At first glance it all looked routine, the same sort of paperwork she had always insisted I sign in the past. Updates, simplifications, amendments. But as my eyes scanned line after line, the pit in my stomach grew heavier. Buried deep in the fine print was a clause so sharp it stole my breath. Full power of attorney, permanent and irrevocable, handing Emily absolute control over my finances, my property, even my medical decisions. Everything. If I had signed these pages, I would have legally erased myself from my own life. I stood there gripping the papers, the edges cutting into my palms, and for a moment I couldn't move. Emily didn't want to wait for nature to take its course. She wanted control now, while I was still alive, wanted to erase me politely and legally without ever getting her hands dirty. And Matthew, was he blind or complicit? Either answer made my chest ache. They weren't family anymore. They were predators in familiar faces. Slowly, deliberately, I slipped the unsigned documents back into the envelope and laid it on the counter exactly where I had found it. Let them believe I hadn't noticed. Let them think I was still that naive woman who signed whatever was put in front of her. They wanted quiet, they would get it, but it would be my kind of quiet, the kind that moves in silence and strikes with precision. That afternoon I returned to Dalton's office, the envelope clutched under my arm. I slid it across his desk without a word, watching his brow furrow as he read through the pages. His jaw tightened, his voice low but sharp. This isn't just unethical, Olivia. This is predatory. If you had signed this, they would have had the right to sell your home, drain your accounts, even place you into a care facility without your consent. He looked up, expecting fear in my face, but what he saw instead was resolve. Then we move faster, I said. For the first time in years my voice did not tremble. Dalton nodded, respect flickering in his eyes. We already have most of the filings in motion. The reversal is being processed, the account freezes are active, and with this, he tapped the papers. We have written proof of intent. That changes everything. I sat back in the chair, breathing evenly. The fear was gone, replaced by something colder, sharper. They thought I would be too overwhelmed to see through their plan, but they had underestimated me. They forgot that silence doesn't mean weakness, that stillness can be the mask of a storm waiting to break. And now, with every document they tried to use against me, I was building my own arsenal. 2 days later the phone rang. A number I recognized instantly, the private investigator Dalton had recommended. I answered on the first ring, my breath shallow, my fingers cold around the receiver. Mrs. Gardner. His voice was measured, almost clinical, but I heard the weight beneath it. You might want to sit down for this. My knees locked under the table, but I stayed standing, staring at the kitchen wall as though bracing against a storm. Tell me, I whispered. He didn't waste time. Your daughter-in-law recently listed the property as collateral for a second mortgage. The pre-approval paperwork was filed just last week with a private lender. My chest hollowed, my grip tightening until the plastic of the phone creaked. Collateral, I repeated, the word foreign and jagged in my mouth. The house I gave them? Yes, he said flatly. The house you gifted outright, fully paid. She's already positioning it for debt. The room spun slightly, the photos on the wall blurring into nothing. Did she disclose how ownership was obtained? I asked, forcing the words through a throat that felt raw. She presented it as a clean family transfer. He replied, no mention of the pressure, the forged authority, the siphoned accounts. In fact, the lender was impressed with their generous family backing. My teeth sank into the inside of my cheek to stop the shaking. They weren't just taking from me anymore, they were gambling with me. Building debt on top of my generosity. Debts I never authorized, risks I never agreed to carry. The investigator's voice cut back in, calm but edged. As far as they know, you're still unaware. They believe you're at home, quiet, uninvolved. They have no idea you've already moved to protect yourself. A slow breath escaped me, sharp and deliberate. Good, I said. Let's keep it that way. We ended the call, and I stood in the dim kitchen for a long time, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was theft in progress, calculated and merciless. And yet, strangely, I felt no panic, no tears, only a cold, focused direction. They hadn't been careful because they thought I would never question them, thought I was still the mother who would do anything to keep the peace, too afraid to rock the fragile boat of family harmony. They hadn't realized something very simple. When a woman like me finally says no, it is already too late for the other side. I walked slowly to the window, staring out at the house I had bought for them. That perfect facade built from my sacrifices, my sleepless nights, my belief in their future. Now I saw it differently, not as a gift but as a weapon they had sharpened against me. My reflection stared back at me in the glass, tired but unbroken. And in that quiet moment I smiled. You gambled with my gift, Emily. I whispered to the empty room. Now I'll gamble with your future. The next few days moved with the precision of clockwork. Each hour another deliberate step away from the woman I had been and closer to the woman I was becoming. Every morning I sat in Dalton's office, flanked by him on one side and the private investigator on the other, the table between us stacked with files, printouts, and evidence. Each document told the same story in a different voice. Unauthorized transfers, hidden accounts, debts tied to my name, all orchestrated under Emily's careful hand. As the pile grew higher, my stomach should have twisted, but it didn't. Instead, I felt steady, sharper with every page. They thought they had buried me under paperwork, but those very papers were now my arsenal. Dalton slid another file across to me one evening, his voice calm but firm. This pattern of deception will speak volumes in court, Olivia. With the investigator's report, it's airtight. I nodded, my fingers tracing the edge of the paper. But I don't want a courtroom battle if it can be avoided, I said, my voice low. I want protection, permanence, no loopholes left open. Dalton's eyes softened, but he nodded. Then we moved faster. And we did. Within 48 hours, the reversal of the property transfer was finalized, every financial power revoked, every joint authorization dissolved. The house was legally mine again, and before Matthew and Emily's cruise ship even touched the port, I had already signed a contract to sell it. A clean cash buyer, expedited closing, the funds wired into an account no one knew existed but me. By the time their sunburned faces smiled for photographs on deck, their so-called dream home no longer belonged to them. I walked through the house one final time before leaving the keys for the realtor, my footsteps echoing softly against the walls I had once painted with hope. The lavender master bedroom Emily had requested, the marble countertops she had insisted were necessary, the curtains I had chosen with my own hands, all of it would soon belong to strangers. For a moment I paused in front of the empty shelf where the framed housewarming photo had once sat. Their smiling faces, their promises, their gratitude. It had all been lies. I whispered softly, "You thought I would never say no." Then I turned and walked out, leaving the door unlocked for the realtor, leaving behind not just a house but decades of silence. That night I didn't cry. I didn't even feel sad. Instead, I felt powerful, as though every signature I had placed on Dalton's papers had been a blade cutting through the chains I had allowed to hold me for years. They thought they had caged me with kindness and obligation, but I had slipped free without them ever noticing. And now, as the days ticked down toward their return, I waited not with dread but with patience, because the trap had already been sprung. When they came home expecting to step back into their comfortable lie, they would find themselves standing in someone else's driveway. And in that moment they would finally see what it meant to gamble with my trust and lose. For days later their cruise ship returned, and I was already there waiting, parked a block away, watching as their car rolled into the driveway with the careless ease of people who believed the world still belonged to them. Emily stepped out first, her sunglasses perched high on her head, barking orders at Matthew as he wrestled with their luggage. She was already talking about scheduling the finalization of the second mortgage, her voice sharp, confident, completely unaware. Matthew barely responded, his eyes fixed on his phone, detached as always. Then they both froze. Two unfamiliar cars sat in the driveway, movers carrying boxes inside. A young couple laughing with the realtor at the front door. Confusion rippled across their faces, panic slowly blooming. That was when I crossed the street, each step measured, unhurried. Matthew looked up first, his voice wavering. "Mom, what's going on? Who are these people?" Emily's smile dropped instantly, her eyes narrowing into slits. "What the hell is this? Why are there strangers in our house?" I let the silence stretch before I spoke, calm and steady. "Not your house. Not anymore." Emily lunged forward, her voice shrill, desperate. "You can't do this. We're refinancing, we have contracts." I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick folder, placing it firmly into Matthew's hands. "Here are the only contracts that matter." His fingers trembled as he flipped through the papers, his face draining of color with every page. The reversal of the property, the sale documents, the investigator's report, copies of unauthorized transactions. Proof. Emily snatched the folder, her breath quickening as she skimmed, searching for loopholes, her words breaking into fragments. "None of this. This won't hold, we were helping. You'll regret this when you calm down." I cut her off, my voice even. "Helping? You mean draining my accounts behind my back? Gambling with a house that was never yours? Forging documents you thought I'd sign while you sailed away?" Her face twisted, rage and fear colliding. Matthew finally spoke, his voice cracking. "Mom, we didn't mean." I raised my hand, the single word slicing through the air. "Stop." He fell silent. For the first time I saw it clearly, not love, not remorse, only fear. Emily's hand shook as she held the papers, but still she snapped, her voice raw. "We have rights, we're family. You can't just cut us off like this." I reached back into my bag and pulled out a second folder, thinner but heavier with weight. I held it between us. "If you want to pursue legal action, this is what you'll face." Emily ripped it from my hand and flipped through it, her breath catching as each page revealed another piece of evidence. Fraud, elder financial abuse, coercion, forgery. Every withdrawal, every transfer, every falsified document traced back to her. Color drained from her cheeks, her eyes darting wildly. Matthew whispered, barely audible. "Emily, what did you do?" She snapped at him, desperation cracking her voice. "Don't you dare put this on me. You were fine with it when the money kept coming in." But he just stood there, shoulders slumping, the weight of it pressing him down. I looked at him one last time, my voice softer now but heavy with finality. "I was your mother, Matthew. You made me your target." His lips quivered, and for a brief second I saw the boy he used to be. But that boy was gone, and I was done mourning him. Emily threw the folder onto the pavement, her scream sharp and broken. You think you've won, but you'll end up alone. I smiled calm, steady. Alone is better than being used. And with that I turned, walked away, and never looked back. By the time I closed the door to my modest apartment later that night, the phone buzzed with a message from Matthew. Desperate apologies spilling across the screen, but I didn't reply. For the first time in years, the silence in my home felt pure, safe mine. They had gambled with my trust and they had lost.